My name is Sherry Guess, and this is the Heavily Meddled Podcast. On this podcast, I interview patients, medical professionals, and industry insiders, having important discussions regarding the all too commonly experienced but lesser identified symptoms of hypersensitivity to metals contained in implanted medical and dental hardware, diet, and environments. These metals often cause a variety of dysfunctional immune responses, chronic pain, and other syndromes that fly under the radar of most patients and physicians. During these interviews, the patients and I discuss ideas for managing symptoms, share personal lifestyle modifications, and talk about how to advocate with and educate providers pre- and post-surgery, along with options found for implant removal and the how-to of adverse event reporting. This podcast does not give medical advice. From time to time, I may interview medical professionals that render personal opinions you can use to follow up with your individual provider. Let's roll. Hello, metalheads, and welcome to the jungle. Thank you for coming back to this episode of the Heavily Meddled Podcast. We are going to go somewhere really fun today. We're going to go to a real life story that really needs to be heard from my friend Tracey O'Neill across the pond in the UK. I'm Sherry Guess, and we are discussing a silent health crisis that affects hundreds and thousands of people. It's turned lives upside down. It's left people with permanent disability and in the dark. Imagine undergoing surgery to improve your mobility only to find out years later that the implant meant to help you could actually be poisoning your body. This is not a fictional horror story. It's a reality for thousands of patients, including my own BFF, Pam. She knows who she is. Tracey, welcome. Tracey O'Neill's going to be sharing her personal experience, what she's learned, and why this issue demands urgent attention. It's not about blame. It's about awareness and ensuring others don't go through the same suffering. So welcome to the show, Tracey. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Sherry. Well, thanks for the welcome.
So, Tracey, why don't you tell us a little bit about who Tracey O'Neill is? Tell us about your background, where you're from, what your life has been prior to you becoming injured and having your surgery, and what life is like now. Give us the Reader's Digest condensed version.
I'm a mum of one son, Jack, and he's all grown up now. I'm super proud of the young man he is today. So I definitely did something right. We haven't had the easiest of journeys, and my son lost his father when he was quite young. So I was really the breadwinner. So everything came down onto me to provide him with a good education, a stable home. And I felt I did that. I always strive to develop myself, qualifying as a fellow in HR and executive coaching. And I've always been really focused on fitness and well-being because I found this really helped me deal with the struggles of everyday life and pressurized careers and learning. But it hasn't always been easy. But what I did take from it was being resilient. So I have got this resilience and perseverance to really push forward. And I think that's what really helped me through this journey so far.
What's your background? Who were you before you even had to embark on this journey? What do you love to do? How did you grow up? And what were your hobbies? What were your fun things?
I've always been a really active child, even from a young age. I would always be out, never at home, always out playing. And as I grew up into my teens, took a real interest in fitness. And I actually qualified as a fitness teacher in the days of Jane Fonda. Legs, tums, and bums. And
we're really putting that slide up. Girl, you have goals right there. Let me tell you what, I've never looked like that a day in my life. What the heck? People are looking at this right now going, oh my gosh. Just for 30 minutes, I'd like to be that person.
Yeah, it was definitely a really great time in my life where sports was really important to me. And I felt it really helped with my mental health as well as the physical health. Grew up in a central London town with a big family, lots of friends, loved socializing. I was always the life and soul of the party and the situations, different events I went to. That's something that's really changed for me through my new experience here today.
I'm sorry that's changed, and we're going to hear all about that, and kudos to you for raising that good son. And you have a couple of dogs that you enjoy, and you also have a partner.
Yes, that's right. So John has been really with me on this journey for the last 7 years now and really has been my rock. And without John, I don't think I'd be as far forward in this journey as I am now. So yeah, I owe everything to him and to my lovely furry friends who are just inspirational when I look at them every day.
And God bless those great men. I'm married to a man that everybody affectionately calls Saint Walter. You have Saint John and I have Saint Walter. God bless these men. I don't know how anybody does it on their own, and people do, but we are quite fortunate indeed. Do you mind if we just jump right into your journey?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. So tell me back when you started and realized that you might first need a hip replacement, and how did you get led to that decision?
It was in 2012. I was 44 years old, now 56. So that's 12 years of this journey so far. I started with limping and hip pain. This went on for quite some time. Went to see an orthopedic surgeon who states they are young adult hip preservation specialists. So particularly focused on young people that want a hip, that want to come back and be active. So I was all excited thinking, yeah, I'm going to get a new hip and I'm going to go back to, no, maybe not everything that I used to do, but at least
Sure.
some of it.
Do you mind if I ask you, what is the average time span of a hip replacement?
Good question, actually, Sherry. I think around 10 to 20 years, depending
Okay.
on the level of activity that person does, depending on how
So
successful
you
the operation is.
so you knew that you might have to have more than one hip replacement.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
why we're so focused on preserving activity and seeing the right person from the beginning.
absolutely.
So you waited a
Um,
bit of time for surgery before you just jumped right in.
I did, yes. There was a waiting list of 18 months. So,
Okay.
of course, in that period, I was in so much pain that went to see my doctor. The painkillers weren't working, so they went up and up. And eventually, I was on aura morphine and morphine patches combined to deal with the pain, which isn't great when you're just going for surgery because the medication that they give you after surgery is morphine. So, what happened
Hmm.
with me is the morphine didn't actually work.
Ah,
I learnt my lesson the first time round and never really went back to taking that level of pain meds in the future.
pain meds never work on me. I can't believe anybody gets relief during surgery. I just go into it cold turkey and basically no meds. And that's spine surgery and every kind of surgery that I've ever had. It's pretty much nothing has worked. I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I'd been called for the operation, it was in 2014. The operation went well, didn't seem to have any issues during surgery itself. Very committed to performing all the physio exercises. I even saw private physios to step it up a little bit. I went to hydrotherapy, used the pool, and was doing everything possible. But after the surgical recovery, I never felt that the hip felt right. And I use that term because I didn't know what was wrong.
How long after the surgery was it when you realized that it didn't feel like it was supposed to feel?
Around 6 months because my recovery period was longer as well. So normally a hip replacement up to 12 weeks, your surgical recovery is done. But I was actually 6 months. I didn't return to work until the end of March the following year. So it was 6 months off work. Didn't feel able to return any sooner.
And what kind of
And
work were
that's
you doing at the time?
HR, human resources. I was traveling also. My part of my job was a sort of a global HR role. So I was traveling to the US, to France, to Italy. So I had a real international role.
Rock star
And I
HR.
wanted to get back to that.
Got it. Understandable.
I continued with the physio and they kept noting that I wasn't making any progress. But in that time, then my left hip started to play up. So I went back to see the surgeon and I was in surgery very quickly within a few months because this time I was private, not NHS. So I was in quite quickly.
For those of us who are not over in the UK, tell us who NHS is and how that plays into the healthcare
Mhm.
system there. I don't know that
So,
we understand the full role.
so it's the National Health Service that we, as British citizens, everybody's entitled to National Health Service. And generally, that's a really good thing because they do a wonderful job in what they have to do. Some people take private medical insurance on top of that, and some employers offer private medical insurance.
Okay.
And the reason they wouldn't cover my right hip privately was because they discovered I was born with congenital hip dysplasia. I had never been told I had congenital hip dysplasia. It had never been an issue, as far as I'm aware, in all of my fitness and sport life. Never, ever did I notice there was a problem with my
And in
hip.
your family, you didn't know about this existing family history of any kind. Okay.
No, there's no other member of my family that has congenital hip dysplasia.
Interesting. How is it then congenital, I would ask? I'm not asking you, I'm just asking the
Yeah.
universe. How is it congenital if nobody has it?
It's quite strange because I actually retrieved all my records going back to day dot, and it was when I was about 7, and it was written in hand actually, because at that time there weren't probably
Sure.
computers. And on there it said congenital hip dysplasia.
Go figure.
So
Okay.
from birth,
So NHS would not cover it or the private wouldn't cover it.
the private wouldn't cover it because they didn't cover pre-existing conditions.
Okay.
But then the left hip didn't have hip dysplasia, so they covered the left hip.
Okay. So you have the one hip that you had the surgery on, then the other hip acts up. You knew right away that you needed surgery on this one, and you had that surgery in a relatively short period of time. That one started healing at what have been maybe a more normal pace. And then you
Yeah,
realized that the first one was not normal at all. Is that kind of how that unrolled?
absolutely. It's spot on. I really had something to compare it against then. And
Finally.
the difference was quite remarkable. So left hip tick at the time and right hip still tried to progress with physio. I even returned to the hospital physio department, had physio there several times. One of the physios did raise it with the consultant that there was what we call bursitis and tendonitis going on in the hip, and that this was something that wasn't going away. Maybe they should explore it further, but I never heard anything.
And how is the surgeon receiving this news?
I believe there was a letter written from the physio to the surgeon, but no, I never heard anything. I only saw this recently when I requested my medical records.
Okay. What kind of early signs of pain and fatigue and unusual symptoms did you have with the new hip? And then how did those progress?
We're going back to, this is now 2016. So the left hip was done in 2015 in December. And so I needed 16, a little bit for recovery on the left hip. But by the end of 16, I was really focusing again back on the right hip, back to different physios, back to hydrotherapy. And in 2017, everything started to get worse. So I was still at the hospital. And 2018, I think at that point, I'd almost given up a little because I tried so many things. I'd spent so much money, thousands and thousands of pounds on private physios, private personal trainers. I don't have a lot of money, but I was taking all the money I could get my hands on and really putting it into, I just want to get better. I just
Sure.
want to improve.
And you listed to me, you had symptoms like trochanteric bursitis, tendonitis, brain fog, electric shocks running through your body, ringing in your ears, just checking your list off here, disorientation, dizziness. You had a metal taste in your mouth, especially when you had been more physically active, like taking a short walk. Is that about right?
In 17, 18, the symptoms were extreme fatigue in the leg, tendonitis, bursitis, pain in the hip, pain in the lower back. And then in 2019, this is when the other symptoms came in. So I was standing in the kitchen one day and it felt like somebody had electrocuted me. It was just across my body, down through my hands.
Mm,
And then I'm sure I blacked out. I was still standing, but I lost myself. Everything went black. The definite metal taste in my mouth started in 2018, 2019. And I thought it was just, I don't know, I don't even know what I thought it was. I just thought, what's happening?
Were you at a point here that doctors suspected that there was anything serious going on, or they just thought you were having a long recovery? Did they dismiss your concerns, or how were your doctors treating you at this point?
Started to see a cardiologist, and they ruled out any cardiology issues. They said it was inconclusive. I then went to see a hip surgeon who straight away, there was no exploration on what hip type I had, what metal was in my body. It was, you've got tendinitis and bursitis. Let's give you 2 rounds of really good, strong steroids into the hip, and let's see how this goes. So we did that. I went away, tried to keep doing some physio. I could barely really walk at that point. I was on 2 sticks, went back into his office, and he said that I should go to chronic pain management and I should take bigger steps and strides because I'm walking too bent and too much not normal. I was actually really shocked, and I actually wrote a complaint letter, which we did get a response, but it was not really taking any action. So I went to see another surgeon, and before doing any cobalt blood tests, which I believe is a critical first step, and from what I've read and researched, it's a critical first step, they aspirated my hip and they took several vials of turbid fluid. John was actually in the room with me at the time. The surgeon had to send the nurse out to go and get more vials because there was so much fluid coming out.
And how did they know that there was fluid there to begin with? Because at this point, we're up to the point in your story where you're just having symptoms and they're not even really believing you. And then they're thinking you just have bursitis, tendinitis. How did they get from there to there's fluid in here, let's aspirate it?
Yeah, so before I had the aspiration, they did an MRI scan, but not a Mars MRI scan.
A Mars MRI. I'm going to read this, Tracey. Metal artifact reduction sequence MRI. It's a specialized type of magnetic resonance imaging used to obtain clear images of tissues and structures near metal implants, such as those used in hip or knee replacements. Learn something new every day. There you go. Okay, so you had an MRI, you had a Mars MRI.
Yeah. I suspect at the time they saw fluid around the hip. So that would be like the inflammatory reaction to the cobalt debris.
Do they do that with or without contrast, that kind of MRI?
They should do it with contrast.
They should do it with contrast.
Yeah.
Depending on who you ask, they probably do it with contrast. I don't know if you heard my last guest. The MRI contrast is a metal. It's a toxic rare earth metal that's retained in everybody it's injected into. So if you have metal issues, that could be a problem. I'm not even going to get into, is it necessary or is it not for that type of MRI? I don't know, but certainly challenging if you have problems with metals, I would say.
I think the first one I had was not a contrast MRI. It was a Mars MRI.
Okay.
From that imaging, they said, let's aspirate the hip and test it for infection.
Okay.
So when the radiologist took out the fluid, he said, I think you should go back to your consultant as soon as possible. But again, no testing for cobalt ions, just infection, and the samples were thrown away.
Okay. So we're ruling out infection. Had you looked at metal allergy at any point so far in your journey, or even before or since? Have you ever looked at metal allergy as a component?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. So we may get there, but toxicity and allergy are different. You can have one, the other, or both. But just because you have a toxicity issue doesn't mean you have an allergy issue. And if you have an allergy issue, it doesn't mean you're toxic in the metal. It means you're allergic to it. So very important to make that distinction. This was a metal on metal hip that you had, correct?
No, my hip type is a dual taper modular neck hip. And what this means is I have a titanium stem, a ceramic ball, but then I have a third part, which is the taper, the neck, and this is cobalt chromium. So you would get potential issues at the bottom of the neck and the top of the neck.
I see.
So you could have issues either side. So that's my type of hip. But
so you didn't have the alarm that the metal on metal hip issue had caused. Did you know about that prior to your surgery? Did you know about the metal on metal hip issues?
No, not prior to my hip revision, yes. But at this point, where I'm
At this
still
point, no. Okay.
exploring, no, we hadn't explored it at that point. We
Okay.
started doing so when we were getting nowhere with various consultants and
And,
diagnostics.
and forgive me for being naive, but is this type of hip still on the market?
Yes,
Okay. All right. So
yes,
take me from that point forward. They aspirated, they cultured, came back, said no infection, correct?
yes.
Then where did you go from there?
So I was told to go back to the gym.
Great.
I was told to go back to the gym
You can't
and
walk, you're on walking sticks, and you don't have an infection, so it must be in your head. Why don't you go to the gym? That's a logical next step.
yeah, I did have a cobalt blood test after the aspiration. But of course, with all that fluid removed, I believe, and I'm not a doctor, I'm not a surgeon, so I don't actually know, but I believe that the cobalt levels can come down because if you're taking that amount of fluid away, which has got a lot of cobalt in, there's less going
Sure.
around the body. So it makes sense that your cobalt levels would go down. And this was later proved whenever I had an aspiration in the future, which I had many, that the cobalt levels would reduce. My levels at that time were still above the sort of
Threshold.
recommended threshold. Yeah. Although that's another topic we'll come on to later about
Okay.
thresholds.
Yes, got it.
Uh,
Whose idea was it to even test for cobalt? Whose radar was that on?
so we actually wrote a letter to both the surgeon that put the implant in and also to the surgeon that I was now seeing, the new surgeon, and just asked the questions. Could it be corrosion of the implant? Could it be a metal issue?
So you were in touch with your surgeon, you were in touch with your medical team, you're in touch with a lot of other people while you're doing your research, and it is not known at this point by you that you have a cobalt component of your metal hip. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I actually contacted the National Joint Register
Okay.
to ask for my implant information, and I got an email back saying I wasn't even on the register.
Okay.
So later that was corrected, and I found that when I looked again, I was on the register,
Okay.
but they were aware of this issue with my hip in 2016, and I was expecting perhaps a letter or a recall or some information about potential risks. So remember, I mentioned earlier I was at the hospital in 17. This was known about in late 16, early 17. So I was all still within their care.
Okay.
So I had the aspiration, had a cobalt blood test, and I was told to go away and go back to normal life, go back to the gym. And I was then referred to another specialist. Went to see them, and they said, I'm not a specialist in potential cobalt poisoning issues. So I'm going to refer you to another specialist. So every time you're seeing the consultant, there's a fee, there's another fee, there's another fee. But this consultant that I saw in the end was very thorough and did a contrast CT SPECT scan, Sherry, and also did bloods, did full body imaging, so bone density, everything. My cobalt levels were at that time 11 parts per billion, which is, if you think about the MOM hips, where the threshold is 7 parts per billion, mine was 11.
So that's
So,
substantial, even over and above what the metal on metal hip threshold is. This is not a small reaction. This is a big reaction.
yeah, it is. And what was quite interesting was when you look at the MRI scans in the past MRI scans I had, it can be very difficult to pick up tissue and bone damage on the MRIs because you've got this issue with the metal causing a distortion. And some of my MRI scans didn't actually show severe tissue and bone damage. It wasn't until I actually had the operation that I truly knew what I had. So the day that I had the operation was in September 2020. It was a complex hip revision, 9 to 10 hours in surgery and intensive care the next day. They removed the dual taper modular neck hip and the stem, because I was quite active, quite fit. My stem was well fixed. So that needed to come out. So they needed to perform an extended trochanteric osteotomy.
Okay, that's a mouthful.
So that means they cut the femur bone open to remove the stem. So it's quite a big procedure.
Can't even imagine that. I didn't even think you could do that. How do they put your leg back together when they do that?
They just close it up. Yeah.
Okay, so what kind of stem did they put a new stem in?
Yeah, so I have a titanium stem now. I have a titanium stem and a titanium neck and the ceramic head. So the whole part needed to be replaced in my hip, and I needed extensive cleaning out because there was a lot of debris. I remember coming round after surgery, not straight away because I didn't come round for a while, but I was back on the ward and I asked the surgeon, "Did you find Cobalt?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Was it bad?" And he said, "Yes." So I had something called my implants. They grade the implants according to how badly they've corroded. And my implant was degraded to Goldberg 4, which is plus black, which is the highest level of degrading you can get in a hip implant.
Wow.
So lots of stuff floating around, cobalt debris floating around your muscle, your bone.
And now all the symptoms make sense.
Yeah, some medical professionals I've spoken to say that what I had was localized cobalt poisoning, where everything's centered around the area of the hip. And then there's something called systemic cobalt poisoning, which is the symptoms I mentioned earlier, which is like brain fog, memory issues, cardiomyopathy, neurological issues,
Do you
cognitive
believe you had
issues.
both?
I do believe I had both.
What have you done or what can you do to remove the cobalt from your bloodstream and from the systemic part of your body? Have you done any of that kind of detox?
So at the moment, they've been watching my cobalt levels and they're coming down. So now they're 1 part per billion or just under.
Okay.
So I still have a cobalt left hip. I have the same hip in the left leg that will need to be addressed in the future.
The same surgery?
Mhm.
Oh, Tracey. The PTSD is real.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm so
um,
sorry.
yeah. To be honest, I try not to think about that at the moment because obviously we'll get on to my journey on this right hip, which didn't finish there.
Yeah, because
So
you said this surgery was 9 or 10 hours. You were in surgery and then you were in ICU for 24 hours. That's
yeah,
just a
it was
lot.
a big operation, but I was very lucky. I had a really good surgeon. He's an expert in cobalt hips, and I found that he did his best for me in that surgery. I was very lucky. I had hydrotherapy, I had physio, I had a PT trainer to try and get me back to try and get over the surgery. And things were going really well initially. For the first 3 months, I found myself improving. I was able to get up from the chair without having to hold on to my sticks. I was becoming more independent. And then when I tried to move off 2 sticks onto one crutch, that's when the problem started. Back to pain in the hip. And I went back to the surgeon and said, something's not right. At the time, I also had bad back pain, but you can imagine an operation like that is going to stress your body.
Sure.
So I was sent to a spine surgeon. They discovered I had a bulging disc and some trapped nerves. So I had spinal nerve ablation and a discectomy. That was in March, April 2021. So only 6 months after I had this complex hip revision.
Okay.
I recovered from that, but the hip was still not right. And I was in so much pain. I couldn't put weight on the hip. I couldn't sit for long periods. I was
And this is the hip
really,
that was just revised.
Just a revised hip, yeah.
Okay.
So I went back to see the surgeon again, and I was referred to rheumatology because there was a potential idea that maybe my pains in my body were caused by something rheumatological. But that wasn't the case. So I went back to see the surgeon and he did another CT SPECT scan, contrast, CT SPECT scan. And they discovered that the bone at the top of the femur had come away from the implant. So the bone had died. His
Mm.
words were the bone had died. It was dark in color.
Why?
They
Because
called
this
it
is the new hip that's supposed to be fine.
existing cobalt debris in the tissue and bone.
So
So
nothing to do with the implant.
no, the new implant hasn't got any cobalt in it, but my body would still maintain having cobalt in it for some time after. And when it's not removed quickly or soon, and there's delays in moving it, and mine was somewhat 6 years. So 2014 to 2020 is 6 years of having that stuff floating around your body. When he did the second revision, that was in November 2022, and he changed the neck of the implant, the top part. He didn't have to change the femur, he just changed the top part.
What's going to make the bone behave differently with this second revision as opposed to the first revision?
I don't know because at the moment I am still under close care with the surgeon. I've had some more scans. I have the same pain and feeling I had after the first revision. So the same feeling of pain at the top of the femur. I've had 2 aspirations, only had one 2 days ago, which was extremely painful, and trying to discover whether there is still cobalt in the hip or whether I have an infection.
What a journey.
Yeah. I had an aspiration done in January this year, and I asked them to test it for cobalt chromium ions to see if there was any cobalt within the fluid. Because it's important for me, because obviously I have a left hip that has the same component, and I would like to understand, is this coming from the right hip or is this coming from the left when I have the cobalt blood tests? But I haven't had those results. And I guess we're nearly at the end of March. That's 3 months. I'm
So,
waiting for this information.
what percentage of pain reduction did you have from the beginning and the first surgery to where you are now? Have you had any reduction in your pain?
I would say
No.
absolutely not. No, I have to walk with a stick, particularly in the last year. My mobility has reduced a lot. I can't take even a very slight incline or decline. There just feels like there's no power in the leg. It feels like it's just not part of me anymore. And I really live in constant pain and suffering because of it. Could I have left the implant in me 4 years ago? Absolutely not. It had
Oh,
to come out.
sure.
If it had been removed sooner, maybe it would have been a less aggressive operation that I would have had to face because the hip would have been less embedded, maybe, or there would have been definitely less cobalt go through my body if it had been taken out earlier. And this was something that I felt really surprised about, that it was already known there was a problem with cobalt being a toxic metal. They used it in these implants. I came back with symptoms very early on. And even when I went back in 2019 to speak to various consultants, I didn't get the answers. I didn't get transparency at
And
all.
how long has it been since the last revision on this hip?
So this last revision will be coming up for 2 years. So I had it done in December 2020. So it's over 2 years old.
And is there anything they can do that remains on this one side where you've had these 2 revisions?
It's under further exploration at the moment. Unfortunately, I am now on the NHS again, So last year, I waited from January 24 to November 24 to see somebody. So you can imagine 11 months waiting time is a big chunk of this 2 years.
Yes.
And then this year, I've had an aspiration in January, an aspiration in March, just 2 days ago, waiting for those results.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Attention metalheads. Are you struggling with skin rashes, joint and systemic pain, or fatigue that just won't go away? Type 4 metal allergy is often overlooked as a culprit in many of today's chronic illnesses. Get to the root of the problem with ELISA testing. ELISA is a scientifically proven and clinically validated test that measures immune reactivity to metal allergens like nickel, cobalt, and titanium. With fast and reliable results, you can get the answers you need to find relief and live a healthier life. Don't let metal allergies control your life any longer. Visit melisa.org to learn more and schedule your test. Trust us, you'll be glad you did. Melisa, a valuable diagnostic tool in medicine. If there was help, a third revision isn't necessarily off the table, but you're still in the middle of your journey with this, correct?
Yeah. And my concern, is there a problem again with the top of the femur? Is there a problem with dead bone? Is the necrosis of the bones still present? Because as a fitness person and being really in touch with my body, I really know every intricate detail of what's happening to me. And I'm very good. I document things. I have pain charts. I think about different activities I've done. What did I feel after those activities? So I can give the doctors more and more information to help them make their decisions and their next steps.
Sure. So are patients tested for cobalt and chromium levels as a routine, or are they not tested at all?
In terms of the wide variety of hips that contain cobalt, I don't know. I would say the people that I've come across, they are not receiving cobalt blood tests. They are not informed what hip they have or that they have a cobalt containing implant.
It just boggles my mind that as advanced as we are as a society, that we don't do some sort of compatibility testing prior to any implant of any joint or any foreign material in the body. Why aren't we doing any compatibility testing? It just is mind blowing to me.
Yeah. One of the points that I've raised with the associations, the orthopedic associations, and with the MHRA, which is your equivalent of the FDA, is that a simple test would not be a huge issue before people go for hip implants or knee implants or shoulders or spine. And also, if they have got a cobalt part in their bodies, it would be simple to do a urine test, for example. So they could send out urine kits to people that have got cobalt implants to get an idea of, okay, who's got sort of high cobalt levels here? Who do we need to call in? I have a saying, if they can do it for COVID, they can do it for cobalt. It's quite a catchy.
Yes.
Why can't you do it for cobalt? This is not a small issue. This is an issue that I believe, and also leading global experts, Dr. Stephen Towers in Alaska, this actually happened to him. He had cobalt poisoning, and he's dedicated his life to researching and to generating more awareness and to helping people. And a lot of information he has shared is really valuable. And this is what myself and John have been doing, really, trying to help people, get them, signpost them and give them the, not advice, but share my experience to say, this is what you don't want to happen. And this is what you could ask when you see your surgeon, ask these key questions to get the insights that you need.
Sure. Is the cobalt test a simple blood test?
So you can do cobalt testing two ways. You can do it through urine or you can do it through blood. And again, particularly in the UK, we know there are various different hospitals that do blood and urine, and some just do blood. So there's not a consistency across the different trusts. And I understand that cobalt blood tests and urine tests are used elsewhere in the world.
Okay. So they tell you you've got cobalt poisoning. How do you react when you hear what's been happening?
If somebody feels that they have got swelling, inflammation, bursitis. They've gone through their recovery period. It's always worth finding out what type of implant you have. And I know, Sherry, you focus on allergies. Yes, as well. Get tested for allergies as well, because that's important. But finding out if you have a cobalt part within your implant so that you can then request a cobalt blood test to check if you have got high levels of cobalt in your blood and whether you are at risk. And then speak to your surgeon. Obviously, your surgeon is the expert. They know about cobalt poisoning. They know about cobalt in hip implants, but it's really important. The cobalt blood test and the comes first, and the imaging, and then an aspiration, rather than the way around it happened for me, which was no cobalt blood test. Let's aspirate the hip to reduce the symptoms, which is really sticking a plaster over it.
Sure.
To then move to cobalt blood test. For me, that was particularly not the right order to really get a good idea of what was going on.
I want to know your reaction to learning that you had cobalt poisoning. How did you feel when they told you had cobalt poisoning?
Shocked, but I was also relieved because it's something that I had suspected because myself and John had done so much research into it. And the day that I had my complex hip revision and it was confirmed in September 2020 that I had cobalt poisoning, I could almost feel like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders and that I felt I wasn't imagining it. Everything I felt was true. And then I thought, great, okay, let's get it out and let's move forward. But I didn't know at the time how my journey was going to continue.
Yeah, understand. Well, you think when you get a revision, we're just going to go in and fix it and I'm going to go happily down the road. You don't think you're going to go in and fix it and it's not going to turn out like you planned.
That's right.
I don't think any of us are really prepared for that.
The type of revision I had is a year for your initial recovery and then 2 to 3 years till everything settles down. And I think this was one of the reasons that my current surgeon really didn't want to go back into the hip too soon. He's the expert, he knows. But when he did explore it through another CT SPECT scan and saw the damage to the top of the femur, the broken bone,
sure,
he said, you're going to need another revision.
Okay. So a lot of people might not know that a hip implant can cause poisoning. So can you go back and tell what happens exactly when cobalt leaches into the body and how that looks?
Yeah, absolutely. Cobalt, in my case, because it's dual taper, so the neck is the cobalt component, any sort of micro movements can cause wear debris, cobalt wear debris. And that debris breaks off, it's ultra fine, and then it can dissolve and go into the blood. It can also attach itself to local tissue, muscle, bone, and you can develop things like pseudotumors. So some people have had reports of lumps on their side of their hip, pseudotumor type effects. And in my case, that the cobalt debris was affecting the bone and the tissue around the neck. If you look at my actual scans, you can see some circulage wires around the top of the hip where the femur is, top of the femur, and that's to give it more stability while the bone is growing onto the implant. My concern is that if the bone doesn't grow onto the implant again, then I could be facing more surgery. I don't know the extent of the damaged bone at this time. So this is something that I'm exploring with the current surgeon.
Okay. So I know that for many people, cobalt is known to be cardiotoxic, but it can also cause, looking at some of the literature and your notes, it can cause neurological issues, memory loss, tremors, hearing and vision problems, cardiovascular, heart damage, thyroid, hypothyroidism, psychiatric depression, anxiety, mood swings, general fatigue and weakness. We got balance issues, tinnitus. So you were told that yours was locally, but yet you had systemic symptoms you told your cardiologist you had memory issues, you had a feeling of blacking out, you were dizzy, your vision was impacted, couldn't handle bright lights. You said they're still exploring this, correct?
Yeah, generally surgeons say there's a clear difference between local and systemic. Systemic cobalt poisoning, from what I've been told by the medical professionals, is will only happen when you have extreme levels of cobalt. So 11 parts per billion is not extreme. In the cases of MOM hips, they were in the hundreds, 4, 5, 600 parts per billion.
I know that you haven't gone here yet, but I'm really curious. I know, at least from my allergy to nickel and a lot of the nickel groups that I'm in, there are a lot of people who are not only allergic to nickel, but also allergic to cobalt. And there are foods
Mm.
in the diet that are high in cobalt. I'm excited for you to see if maybe allergy is an issue to cobalt as well as the toxicity for you, because I also know that you can start out without a sensitivity, but as you're exposed to a metal over time, I have people ask me, should I get a metal allergy test prior to having an implant? And the answer is typically yes, but it may not show everything because a lot of times our body doesn't mount an immune response or a reaction until it's presented with that hardware. So
Mm.
I wonder if you didn't maybe start off with a huge sensitivity to cobalt, but over time and over all these years of this cobalt circulating through your bloodstream, now you developed a hypersensitivity as well, because the
Mm.
systemic symptoms for that can look a lot like the toxicity symptoms. And then you mentioned
Yeah.
something earlier on, and I'm not a doctor, but I'm just freeform thinking with you here. You mentioned the electric shock that you had. Are you aware of
Mm.
Dr. Schroeder's studies with galvanism? Do you know
No.
anything about? Okay.
I did look at your podcast on that the other day.
Let me blow your mind real quick. So Dr.
Mm.
Schroeder, so when you have dissimilar metals in the body, they can actually create an electrical current between them that runs through your tissue. I wasn't before my surgeries, but after I got all my implants, I became very EMF sensitive. And we hypothesize now that it's because I had metal in my mouth, and I never counted up how many implants I had at one time. I should probably do that, but it was many. I probably had 20 pieces of metal at one time, and some are going to have this positive charge and some the negative charge. He did an experiment in the OR where he actually put a voltmeter to a dental filling and then a voltmeter to hardware in a foot in a sterile environment. Of course, he's a surgeon in the OR. He's
Mm.
getting ready to take out this foot and ankle hardware, and he did it before and after. He took out the hardware, and there was a 200 millivolt drop in the electrical current in the body when he removed the hardware. So I wonder if when you had the electrical sensation, you hit something that gave you some kind of electrical jolt and you already had this other current. It's a real
Mm.
thing, these galvanic reactions. So I think you have a lot of different things going on, and it may not be
Mm.
only toxicity.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And one of the things I've been asking my GP to explore with me at the moment is hypothyroidism, because I really feel like I eat very little. Eat a very good diet. I don't eat anything processed. And I just feel like my body's not metabolizing the food. I get very bad stomach cramps and feel quite sick when I'm eating and things like that. This is again something that I'm looking into, but you can imagine all these different things you've got to look into,
Sure. I
and
can
and
imagine.
and, uh, and you think I've got a day job as well. you know?
Sure. And in my
So
case, 2-day jobs. But
exactly.
I can say that people with metal issues seem to very frequently have thyroid issues. It seems to be one of the first things to show up. And before I got sick, I was hoping to go into PA school to learn to manage thyroid. That was my first symptom, was my thyroid. My thyroid was the size of my hand. It was supposed to be the size of my thumb. But it's amazing to me how many practitioners don't know how to properly test thyroid. So I would say for
Hmm.
you or anybody else, you can have subclinical hypothyroidism. It's very important to make sure your antibodies to your thyroid are tested. There's several, antithyroglobulin and thyroid peroxidase. You can test those. Always also really important to test for free T3 and free T4. T3 is your active thyroid hormone, and a lot of surgeons and doctors only test TSH, which is your thyroid stimulating hormone, and T4, which is your inactive. And if you are not healthy, a lot of times you will not convert that inactive T4 to T3. And so you can have this subclinical hypothyroidism. And if you're just going to a mainstream doctor that's not testing for the antibodies or your T3, and that can be controversial because a lot of them are worried about supplementing with T3 because it can have cardiac effects. But because it's active and it's 5 times stronger than the T4. But I would
Mm.
say stay on that and follow your gut. Our bodies have innate intelligence. And if your gut is telling you may have a thyroid issue, you may have a thyroid issue.
Mm.
So keep beating your doctors up over that. Let me go back to the hip. You're in contact with Dr. Stephen Tower, who's an expert. He suffered cobalt metal poisoning from his own metal on metal hip, and he's dedicated his life to research. So you're in collaboration with him. And his research study has shown that exposure to even low levels of cobalt over a long period of time can cause, systemic symptoms.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that and what you think people need to do if they're experiencing hip pains, signs of bursitis or tendonitis that don't go away after their own hip surgery. What can you advise?
Yeah, and I guess this is a leading expert in cobalt toxicity. Then you have this information that you've just shared. And then you get the other side of it where you're told actually you can't have systemic cobalt poisoning because you have to have these high numbers. But I know from my own symptoms particularly when the cobalt was at its highest, and I think 11 parts per billion for my type of hip implant was the high number, a high amount of cobalt.
Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little more about Stephen Towers and the bleeding edge?
Yeah, the problem is a global issue, not just a UK issue, and one that Dr. Stephen Towers, orthopedic expert surgeon, has been tirelessly working to warn the dangers of cobalt in hip implants. And he appeared in a Netflix documentary, The Bleeding Edge, where he shared his own personal story of his experience with extensive amounts of cobalt. And we know that there are many different variations of implants, but what we're talking about is that these implants, no matter what they are, if they have cobalt, is there a risk of wear or corrosion, which could cause these metal particles to leak into the bloodstream and causing either localized or, in some cases, systemic cobalt poisoning. To sum that up, this really isn't just about my hip. This is about hips containing cobalt where the patient has reported pain and inflammatory responses or inflammatory conditions. Really get them help, listen to them, and get them the tests that they need. The sooner it is identified, the sooner the patient can be treated.
And I don't think cobalt has to be just a hip issue. Surely, I know that there are knees that contain cobalt, and I would imagine there are shoulders that contain cobalt. And so I don't think it's just even a hip problem. Not only is it not a UK problem, I don't think it's just a hip problem.
Yeah, correct. I haven't come across anybody in my journey yet that has a cobalt issue with their knee. But that's not to say I won't in the future.
I have come across a cobalt issue in the knees. So, yeah, you may have to expand to hips and knees. You're doing great advocacy work over there, which we'll come back to in a minute. But let me go back for a minute and talk about the NHS and the manufacturers. And it doesn't have to be just the NHS, it can be the FDA over here. Do you think that the government regulatory bodies and the manufacturers have done enough to acknowledge and to address the issues?
The simple answer is no. Why has it taken since 2016, when they knew about my type of hip, to where we are now in 2024, where we've actually had 2 Daily Telegraph articles about this topic? Why has it taken it to this point? And obviously, I appeared on Channel 5 News as well. Why has it taken it to that point to actually start an investigation and really start exploring?
And you're not even a doctor.
I'm not a doctor. I'm just little old me in Milton Keynes.
Why do the patients have to figure this out? Why is the burden on the patient and not the medical community?
Yeah. And this is why I felt so passionate, not just about what happened to me and what is still happening to me, but that something needs to be done to actually put the measures in place to create first more awareness, to put consistent monitoring in place, because everybody's doing it differently. If we all do it the same, we get the same kind of output in terms of data. But if you're testing for urine here and cobalt here, or both, or none, we're not going to have the data that's needed to be able to make informed decisions in the patient's interest.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
And so this is not about alarming people. It's about creating the awareness. And,
No, and we're
you
not
know,
saying don't have your hip replaced. If you need a hip replacement, do your due diligence. And joint
yeah,
replacements have a place and they're not going away, and metal implants aren't going away, but we can do better. And I think that's what we're saying. We can do better ahead of time. We can do better during the process, and we can have surveillance on post-surgical patients and not gaslight a patient who says something's not right.
yeah,
Something's not right.
yeah. And I
So
think it's all too quick and dirty to actually just send somebody to chronic pain management because that seems to be the easiest option at the time. That's what happened to me.
I had the
And
same thing. I'm reacting to my metal implants, and pain is pain, right? You had pain from a toxicity issue. I had pain from an allergy issue. But when I was in my acute phase of pain, I couldn't walk 5 feet. And the
mm,
rheumatologist is telling me it's fibromyalgia. And what we have found best for fibromyalgia is exercise. So you really just need to go exercise. How do you tell somebody to exercise who can't walk across the floor?
mm,
And
yeah,
I'm telling you now, and from your own experience, no amount of exercise would have fixed my metal allergy. No amount of exercise would have fixed that inflammation. I would have just wound up in the ER a million
mm,
times over every
mm,
time I tried to go exercise. Just
yeah, that's
we've
right.
got to do better.
And I think in some of the physios that I saw, particularly after my first revision, where I knew something was wrong, I was told I was lazy, I wasn't doing the exercise. And I said, look, excuse me, I'm an ex-fitness instructor. I am super disciplined. I would get up at 5 a.m. and do my exercises before I went to work. I would do my stretching at lunchtime. I would do my meditation and yoga in the evenings. I was super disciplined. And yeah, it was really hurt actually that it was assumed that I just wasn't giving it 100%. And I seriously gave it more than 100% and several thousands of pounds in cost.
At least. What has the reaction been to your stories in the media? You've gotten a lot of attention in the Daily Telegraph. You've got a lot of attention in the news media. What has the reaction from the news media and from the public been from what you've shared?
Mhm. Oh, it's been wonderful, actually. And Michael Searles from the Daily Telegraph did an amazing job on the first article because it really explained the problem quite well. Charities that I've been in touch with, several charities, really interested in helping to generate awareness. And people have been actually quite shocked that this has not been addressed before now, that somebody like me, who's just an average person with my partner, we've pushed things forward to really try and generate this awareness and really help people to know what this problem's about so that they can be better informed and they can make informed decisions about where they want to go, what they want to do.
So, what would you say to somebody that has chronic hip pain and inflammation around their implant? What's your advice for them?
Of course, like we said before, we're not doctors, we're not medically trained,
Sure.
but I have got my experience to share. So, what happened to me and the pathway that my journey took, I can help guide people to understand where they can get information from, guide them to ask the right questions to their surgeon, to really explore their implant and could it potentially be a cobalt issue. In the UK, you've got the National Joint Register where you can get a very detailed report of your implant. And in the US, there's a similar system in place
Right.
where you can ask for your implant information. You know, if you have got a cobalt containing implant, don't panic because really it's a process to find out if your cobalt levels are significant, if you have symptoms, and to have the imaging done and to speak to a doctor or a surgeon who has experience in cobaltism or cobalt poisoning.
Now, I didn't have any cobalt poisoning, at least that I know of, although any amount of foreign cobalt in the body, I think, cannot be good. But I had spinal hardware that was cobalt. And when I did the metal allergy testing, I also added metal ion testing, and they did detect circulating cobalt that was above the threshold in my body. So again, it's
Mm,
not just knees and joints, it's spinal hardware. There's probably a number of different hardwares that use chromium. So
mm.
definitely important for us to have it on the radar and to monitor. I think this decade is really going to be the year of the metals. Okay, so you've been working a lot with Dr. Stephen Towers, who is an orthopedic surgeon who had his own metal on metal hip. He is one of your colleagues. Why don't you tell us a little more about Dr. Towers?
Yeah, so we came across Dr. Towers' work and research in our research, and we were researching cobalt metal poisoning. And we were really intrigued by his story of what actually happened to him, which was severe cobalt poisoning. And he's dedicated his life to researching cobalt poisoning, cobalt toxicity. And we've been in close collaboration with him to learn more from him from his research and studies. And what was really interesting was Dr. Stephen Towers has written some papers that show that even small amounts of cobalt over a long period of time can also cause systemic symptoms. And of course, in my case, if I'd had the cobalt blood test, I would probably know what my levels were, but I did have it over an extended period of time. So my message to people is if you are recovering from a hip surgery and after your recovery, you are experiencing pain, signs of bursitis, tendonitis that doesn't go away, you've exhausted your physiotherapy, go back to your surgeon, ask what implant type you have, identify whether you have a cobalt component, and if so, get a cobalt blood test or a urine cobalt test, which will really give you the insights into what your cobalt levels are, and the surgeon will then be able to make an informed decision.
And it's basically any hip containing cobalt where a patient reports physical hip pain and inflammatory responses. They have to be given correct diagnostics in the correct order. So you said it's really important in one of your emails to me to not throw away critical samples for testing of cobalt. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And to test even aspirations, fluid from the hip can be tested for cobalt chromium as well. If you're going to take it and test it for infection, then why not test it for cobalt chromium?
And these patients, a lot of them may not know, Dr. Towers appeared in the documentary about implants and metal toxicity and hypersensitivity called The Bleeding Edge. It's a Netflix movie. So if you haven't seen that, definitely, we can link to that here in the show notes, but definitely you want to go back and see this. Let's jump for a minute to talk about global governmental bodies like the NHS and the FDA and other similar organizations worldwide. Do you think that these organizations, as well as the manufacturers, have done enough to acknowledge and address this issue, and why or why not?
Yeah, the simple answer is personally don't think they've done enough. And I think my partner John would also say that, and many other people within our social networking group. This issue was known about in my implant since late 2016, 2017. And we're now at 2024. It's taken two media articles, a Channel 5 news show, to really bring this to the top. So why has it taken since 2016 to 2024 for this critical issue to be investigated? And myself and my partner, who are just normal people going about our daily jobs, we're not scientists, we're not doctors, but we really took the time to do the research and to speak to people and to find out different people's circumstances in order to be where we are now. The two Daily Telegraph articles also highlighted this issue together with the Channel 5 interview where myself and Professor Alistair Hart appeared in the news programme, and to really say this is a problem. Cobalt is a problem in hips and something needs to be done.
How can you accept what happened to you without standing up and talking about it and trying to make it better for somebody else going on the path forward with you? What has the response been to the media that you've talked to and from those big articles in the Daily Telegraph and the Channel 5 News? What has the response been?
The media have been super supportive from the start. When I shared my story with them, it really touched them. With the social media groups and the charities that I've connected with and associations, they've been alarmed. They've never heard of this. What is this? And now that they've seen more information coming out about cobalt poisoning, they're really interested to learn more. And they're very compassionate about people going through this and the stories that I'm sharing with them about different people's circumstances. They're surprised that this is actually happening.
Have you had patients reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. People will reach out all the time. They've had symptoms for many years. They've been referred to chronic pain management. They've not been told what implant they have or that they could have a cobalt component, therefore could be a risk of cobalt poisoning or cobalt toxicity, they're really left in the dark. And so what myself and my partner do is we help people find that information, such as contacting the National Joint Register, writing to their surgeon to ask for their implant information, to really give them the opportunity to get the right questions forward to their surgeon to get the right answers.
Got it. Aside from contacting you and receiving some of your guidance, what would you say to somebody who maybe is just stumbling upon this episode or stumbling upon this for the first time? What would you say to somebody who has a chronic pain in their hip and inflammation around their implant?
Firstly, don't panic. That's important. It's really important to find out what your implant is made of. What are the components and what are the metals within that implant? If you have symptoms such as swelling, bursitis, fatigue in the leg, and you've noticed that this is not normal, it's something out of the normal for you and it's been going on for some time, go and see your surgeon straight away. Have a discussion about what type of implant you have and whether you have a cobalt component. And if you do have a cobalt component, request a cobalt metal ions blood test or a urine cobalt test as soon as possible.
And it's anything over 1 part per billion is cause for concern, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Except when we talk about metal on metal hips, it's 7 parts per billion because it's a different type of hip. But 1 part per billion is definitely a threshold for exploring further.
Sure. If the governmental bodies or the NHS officials or the FDA are listening right now, what would you say to them? What's your message?
My message is to treat this matter with a sense of urgency and ensure that people who are at potential risk receive the diagnostics without delay. In addition, consistency in diagnostics and updating the cobalt thresholds for different types of cobalt containing hips. Like in my case, the dual taper hip, anything over 1 part per billion should be further investigated and monitored.
And finally, where can people go to learn more, get tested, or to support your cause and to find out how you can help them?
Yeah, absolutely. So my partner and I set up a Facebook group. It's called Hip Replacement Chronic Pain and Cobalt Poisoning, as well as a website, cobaltpoisoning.me. And in our social media site, we really bring our community together to share experiences, to learn from each other, to help each other find the right information or take the next steps. And really, this is about helping people get more informed. This is not about scaring people. Mm-hmm. This is about helping people who are suffering in silence and to really start thinking more about effecting change for the longer term.
Got it. Tracey, your story is truly eye-opening. I really admire your courage in being willing to speak out and share with our listeners. And thank you so much for sharing this with us today.
No, thank you for having me, Sherry. It's been really a wonderful platform to raise awareness. And this is really the purpose. So my kind of last words of wisdom, if they can do it for COVID and test people, they can do it for cobalt.
Amen to that. So if somebody has had a cobalt containing implant, please don't ignore the signs. Tracey's willing to help you. There's lots of resources on heavenlymetal.com. We're going to put Tracey's resources and other resources in the show notes. You can always access them at the bottom of any of the videos. There's also a link to advocate for testing for metal hypersensitivity prior to surgery on the website. Tracey and I would love to press for more compatibility testing as we get further down the roads with these implants. They're not going away, and the more we can get compatibility testing, allergy testing, the fewer people have to suffer. And I have to point out that Tracey is rocking her cobalt blue background today, so she didn't come on without props, y'all. Thank you for being part of our movement to help tell the medical establishment that we're not going to take it anymore.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in today. Please don't forget to follow me on social media and to like, share, and subscribe. My primary mission is reaching out to others who may be suffering from hypersensitivity reactions to metal implants and pointing them to resources that can assist with hope, help, and healing. If you know someone that suffers from a chronic illness, You might ask if they have any implanted metal hardware, and if they've ever had a reaction to jewelry or metals of any kind. Might not even be on their radar. Visit us at heavilymetaled.com, where you can find images and documentation relating to our show today, as well as a number of valuable resources and links to assist you on your own personal healing journey. Until next time, keep on rocking.